The morning sun peeked through the blinds of her small cubicle as she looked over the numbers for the fifth time. Lynn had been at Meridian Financial for 3 years now, always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Today was different, though. Today, she finally had proof. The office buzzed with the usual Monday morning chaos, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, coffee brewing. Lynn barely noticed any of it. For months, something about the quarterly reports hadn't added up. Small discrepancies at first, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, but Lynn always paid attention. "You're overthinking this," her co-worker Raj had told her last week. "Nobody cares about these tiny differences." But the differences weren't tiny anymore. Lynn had tracked them back 6 quarters, and the pattern was clear as day. Someone was cooking the books, and not in a small way. Her heart pounded as she organized her evidence into a neat folder. The red one she bought specially for this moment. Important things deserved important folders, her grandmother always said. Lynn checked her appearance in the small mirror she kept in her desk drawer, straightening her simple blue blazer and tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. First impressions mattered, especially when you were about to accuse someone powerful of fraud. Mr. Patel, the CFO, had always been polite to her in passing, though he'd never actually remembered her name in 3 years. She practiced what she would say as she walked to the elevator. "Sir, I've found some irregularities in our financial reporting that I think deserve attention. Professional. Neutral. Non-accusatory." The executive floor was another world compared to the cramped accounting department downstairs. Plush carpets, real paintings on the walls, glass offices with actual doors instead of fabric cubicle dividers. "Can I help you?" asked the executive assistant, eyeing Lynn's department store clothes with thinly veiled judgment. "I have an appointment with Mr. Patel," Lynn lied smoothly. Sometimes you had to bend the rules to do what was right. To her surprise, the assistant nodded and pointed to a waiting area. "He's finishing up a call. 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes stretched like taffy as Lynn rehearsed her explanation again and again. She didn't want fame or credit. She just wanted to do her job properly. When she finally entered Mr. Patel's office, the view of the city nearly distracted her from her mission. She'd never been this high up in the building before. "You're from accounting, yes?" Mr. Patel said without looking up from his computer. "Yes, sir. Lynn from Financial Analysis. I've found something important in our quarterly reports." She placed the red folder on his desk. What happened next still didn't make sense, even hours later as she sat stunned on a bench outside the building. 1 minute she was explaining the discrepancies, watching Mr. Patel's face change from boredom to surprise to something that looked strangely like fear. The next minute he was on the phone. "Security, please escort someone from accounting out of the building. Immediately." "But sir, if you look at page 3, you can clearly see." "We don't tolerate employees who make false accusations." He cut her off loudly, as if performing for an invisible audience. Security came quickly. 2 men in black suits who wouldn't meet her eyes as they walked her back to her desk, watched her pack her personal items into a cardboard box, and escorted her through the main lobby. The whispers followed her all the way to the elevator. Former colleagues stared or looked away entirely. Nobody spoke up. Nobody questioned why a quiet, hard-working analyst was being treated like a criminal. Outside, the spring air felt unnaturally cold as Lynn clutched her sad little box of desk plants and family photos. 3 years of her life ended in less than 15 minutes. What she didn't know then, sitting on that bench with tears threatening to spill, was that across town, her carefully prepared red folder had already been faxed to a very interested party. And Lynn's life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Lynn's tiny apartment felt emptier than usual that night. The cardboard box sat untouched on her kitchen table, a painful reminder of everything that had happened. Outside, rain tapped against her windows as if trying to get her attention. She hadn't cried yet. That surprised her. Instead, a strange, calm anger had settled into her bones as she made herself a cup of tea with hands that refused to tremble. "You were right," she said to the photo of her grandmother on the fridge. The old woman's knowing smile seemed to say, "Of course I was." Lynn opened her laptop and pulled out the flash drive she'd kept in her pocket. She wasn't stupid. She'd made copies of everything. Working in accounting had taught her one valuable lesson: always keep receipts. The numbers stared back at her from the screen, telling their damning story. Someone had been shifting money around for at least 18 months. Small amounts at first, then gradually larger sums. Not enough to immediately raise alarms, but enough that over time, millions had disappeared into places they shouldn't be. Lynn rubbed her tired eyes. What now? Go to the police? The newspapers? She wasn't sure who would even care about her story. Just another disgruntled ex-employee making wild accusations, they'd say. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former co-worker Raj. What happened? Everyone's saying you tried to blackmail Patel. So that was the story they were spinning. Lynn turned her phone off without replying. She needed to think. On her small balcony, watching the city lights blur through the rain, she remembered something her first boss had told her. In finance, there are no coincidences. Just patterns we haven't recognized yet. There was a pattern here she was missing. Why react so strongly? Why not just dismiss her concerns? Why the dramatic escort out of the building? Because they were scared. The realization hit her like a splash of cold water. They weren't angry. They were terrified she'd found something. Back at her laptop, Lynn dug deeper into the files. If there was a trail, she would find it. 4 hours and 2 pots of tea later, she had it. A connection to offshore accounts, cleverly hidden but definitely there. This wasn't just cooking the books. This was serious fraud. Just before midnight, her doorbell rang. Lynn froze. Nobody ever visited her, especially not this late. Had they come for her computer too? Would they try to silence her completely? She peered through the peephole to see a woman she didn't recognize. Professional suit, calm demeanor, patient stance. Who is it? Lynn called through the door. My name is Diane Wom. I'm from Atlas Corporate Security. I'd like to speak with you about Meridian Financial. Lynn's heart hammered. Atlas Corp. The parent company that owned Meridian and a dozen other businesses. They'd found her already. Against her better judgment, but keeping the chain lock fastened, Lynn opened the door a crack. I have nothing to say. I was fired today. The woman nodded. I know. That's why I'm here. May I come in? What I have to tell you shouldn't be discussed in a hallway. Something in the woman's eyes, a steadiness, an honesty, made Lynn reluctantly unlock the chain. As soon as Diane stepped inside, she placed a business card in Lynn's hand and said words that made no sense at first. The CFO you reported to has been under investigation for 6 months. We've been watching, waiting for someone honest enough to notice what was happening. She glanced at Lynn's open laptop. Looks like you've been busy tonight. Lynn stared at her. You knew? All this time? Diane smiled slightly. We suspected. We needed proof, and someone with integrity to find it. She placed a sealed envelope on the kitchen table next to the sad cardboard box. My boss would like to meet with you tomorrow. Atlas Corp has a proposition that might interest you. As Diane left, Lynn stood frozen, the envelope untouched. Through her rain-streaked window, she could see the Atlas building in the distance, its top floors still lit despite the late hour. Something told her she wouldn't be sleeping much tonight. Lynn arrived at the Grand Plaza Hotel 15 minutes early, her best blazer slightly tight across the shoulders. It was the only professional outfit she owned that wasn't still in the cardboard box she couldn't bring herself to unpack. The lobby gleamed with marble and money. Lynn felt out of place, clutching her worn leather bag containing all her evidence. She'd spent the night organizing everything, printing key documents, and trying to understand the contents of the envelope Diane had left. Inside had been a formal letter requesting her presence at this meeting, along with a non-disclosure agreement that she'd studied carefully before signing. The letter was signed by someone named Victoria Chang, CEO of Atlas Corp. Ms. Wu? A hotel staff member approached. You're expected on the top floor. Please follow me. The private elevator required a keycard. As they ascended, Lynn practiced her breathing. Whatever this meeting was about, she would stay calm and professional, no emotion, just facts. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse suite with floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below, tiny cars and tinier people going about their ordinary lives. There you are. Lynn turned to see an older woman rising from a leather chair. Unlike the executives at Meridian with their flashy watches and designer suits, Victoria Chang wore simple black pants and a gray silk blouse. Her only jewelry was a jade pendant that reminded Lynn of one her grandmother used to wear. Thank you for coming, Victoria said, gesturing to a chair opposite hers. Tea? Lynn nodded, still clutching her bag. Yes, please. Victoria poured from a porcelain teapot, the movements precise and practiced. My father always said you can tell a lot about people by how they take their tea. My grandmother said the same thing, Lynn replied, accepting the cup. A small smile crossed Victoria's face. Wise women, our grandmothers. She sat back, studying Lynn with sharp eyes. Diane tells me you figured out quite a bit on your own. Lynn straightened. About the fraud at Meridian? Yes. I have documentation showing at least 18 months off. Victoria held up a hand. I've seen your work. Very thorough. Very precise. She placed a tablet on the table between them and swiped through several screens of Lynn's own spreadsheets and analysis. What I want to know is why. Why did you pursue this when others ignored it? The question caught Lynn off guard. She'd expected to defend her findings, not her motives. Because, she began, then found her voice. Because it was wrong. The numbers didn't match, and nobody seemed to care. If we can't trust financial statements, what can we trust? Victoria nodded slowly. Do you know what Atlas Corp does, Ms. Wu? You own Meridian and other financial companies, real estate holdings too, I think. We do. 17 companies across 4 industries. We employ over 15,000 people. Victoria leaned forward. And 6 months ago, our internal auditors flagged potential issues at Meridian. Rather than rushing in, we watched. Waited. Lynn's mind raced. You were conducting your own investigation. Yes, we needed to understand how deep the problem went. Who was involved? Who wasn't? Victoria's gaze was steady. And who, if anyone, would notice and have the courage to speak up? She slid a folder across the table, not red like Lynn's, but deep blue with the Atlas logo embossed in silver. Mr. Patel and 3 others were arrested this morning. The fraud was significant, but contained. Meridian itself is sound, but lacks leadership we can trust. Victoria tapped the folder. That's where you come in. Lynn opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside was an employment contract. Her eyes widened at the job title, Executive Director, Meridian Financial. This must be a mistake, she whispered. Victoria Chang's laugh was warm and genuine. I don't make mistakes like that, Ms. Wu. We need someone with integrity to clean house. Someone who sees problems and fixes them instead of hiding them. She reached across and tapped the salary figure. That number is not a mistake either. Lynn stared at the contract, then at the woman across from her. The people there, they all saw me get thrown out. Nobody will respect me. Victoria smiled, and for a moment, Lynn saw something almost predatory in her expression. That's precisely why it has to be you. 1 week later, Lynn stood in front of the Meridian Financial Building, the morning sun reflecting off its glass facade. She'd walked through these doors hundreds of times before, but never like this. Never in a new charcoal suit tailored specifically for this moment. Never with Victoria Chang's words still ringing in her ears. Show them who you really are. The security guard did a double take as she approached. It was the same man who had escorted her out just 7 days ago, his face now flushing with recognition. Good morning, Pavel, Lynn said, reading his Nemadig for the first time. I'm starting in a new position today. Yes, of course, he stammered, quickly opening the door. Welcome back, ma'am. The lobby buzzed with the usual Monday energy, but a hush fell as people noticed her. Lynn kept her chin up, walking straight to the reception desk where Tammy, who had pointedly looked away during Lynn's humiliating exit, now scrambled to her feet. Ms. Wu, they told us you were coming, but I didn't. Welcome. Tammy thrust a new ID badge across the counter. This one had different access codes than her old one, executive-level access. Thank you, Tammy. Lynn clipped the badge to her lapel. Could you direct me to my new office? I haven't been to the executive floor before. Of course. Let me call someone to escort you. Tammy reached for the phone. No need, Lynn said quietly. I can find my way. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. 2 of her former colleagues stepped in, then froze when they saw her. Morning, Lynn nodded, pressing the button for the 32nd floor. Their eyes widened at her destination. You're going to the executive floor, one whispered. Lynn just smiled as the doors closed. The executive floor was another world compared to the accounting department's cramped cubicles. Plush carpet muffled her footsteps. Real plants thrived in the natural light. A silver-haired woman approached, hand extended. "Ms. Wu, I'm Donna, the executive floor manager. Your office is ready." Lin followed her down a hallway lined with glass-walled offices. People looked up as she passed, curiosity and confusion on their faces. Donna stopped at a corner office with breathtaking views of the city and river beyond. "This is yours," Donna said, opening the door. "Mr. Patel's former office." Lin stepped inside, taking in the expensive desk, the plush visitor chairs, the private bathroom. And there, in the center of the desk, sat her cardboard box of personal items. Someone had placed a small plant next to it, a peace lily in a ceramic pot. "The plant is from Ms. Chang," Donna explained. "She said you'd understand." Lin nodded, touching one white petal. "Peace after the storm. A new beginning." "Your team is gathering in the conference room at 10 a.m., Donna continued. "They're a bit nervous." "They should be," Lin said softly, but without malice. Alone in her office, Lin unpacked her few belongings. Her grandmother's photo went beside the computer, her lucky pen in the drawer, her degree, the first in her family, on the wall where everyone could see it. She opened the files Victoria had given her. Dossiers on every executive at Meridian, performance reviews, salary information, notes about who had known about the fraud, and looked away. At 9:55, Lin stood in front of the mirror in her private bathroom. The woman who looked back was different from the one who'd been thrown out a week ago. Same face, same eyes, but something had changed. She wasn't just angry anymore. She had purpose. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Remember why you're there. Not for revenge, for justice." Lin straightened her jacket and walked to the conference room. Through the glass walls, she could see them waiting, the same executives who had watched her humiliation without a word of protest, some who had actively participated in it. As she pushed open the door, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Lin took a deep breath and stepped into her new role. "Good morning," she said. "Let's get started." The conference room felt smaller than it looked. 12 people sat around the polished table, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Lin recognized most of them from her time in accounting, though they'd rarely spoken to her directly. Back then, she was just a number cruncher, invisible until she became inconvenient. "For those who don't know me," Lin began, setting her tablet on the table, "I'm Lin Wu. Until last week, I worked in financial analysis. Today, I'm your new executive director." A man with silver hair at his temples, Director Chen from operations, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Ms. Wu, some of us are confused about this unusual appointment." Lin met his gaze steadily. "I understand. It's not every day that someone goes from being escorted out by security to running the department." She paused, letting the uncomfortable truth hang in the air. "But these aren't ordinary circumstances, are they, Mr. Chen?" He shifted in his seat. The room temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. "Atlas Corp has asked me to address the financial irregularities that I discovered last week," Lin continued. "The same irregularities that got me fired." "You weren't fired," interrupted a woman Lin recognized as the HR director. "You resigned." Lin raised an eyebrow. "Is that what Mr. Patel told you to put in my file, Ms. Zhao?" The woman flushed red. "He said you were making trouble, spreading false accusations." Lin opened her tablet and tapped the screen. The wall-mounted display lit up with spreadsheets and transaction records. "These don't look false to me, or to the federal investigators who arrested Mr. Patel yesterday." The silence that followed was absolute. Some faces showed genuine shock. Others, Lin noted carefully, showed fear. "I'm not here to assign blame," Lin said, softening her tone slightly. "I'm here to fix what's broken. But to do that, I need to know who knew what and when." Director Chen leaned forward. "You can't seriously expect us to." "I have full access to all communication records," Lin cut in. "Emails, text messages, meeting notes. Atlas Corp has authorized a complete audit." She let that sink in. "So you can tell me now, or I can find out later. One path is much easier than the other." "This is ridiculous," said a thin man at the far end of the table. I've been with Meridian for 15 years. I don't have to answer to some junior accountant, whoa. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Torres. Lynn's voice remained calm despite her racing heart. She pulled a folder from her bag, the same red one she carried to Mr. Patel's office. This contains evidence of 7 executives who helped hide the fraud. 3 are in this room right now. She didn't specify which ones. Let them all sweat. Lynn stood and walked slowly around the table. By the end of today, I'll know everything. Who looked the other way? Who helped cover up the missing money? Who told themselves it wasn't their problem? She stopped behind Mr. Torres's chair. And who was brave enough to speak up when they saw something wrong? Someone at the far end of the table raised a hand hesitantly. It was Raj from her old department, looking nervous but determined. I tried to tell someone after you left, he said quietly. They wouldn't listen. Lynn nodded, grateful for the unexpected ally. Thank you for your honesty. She returned to her place at the head of the table. Here's what happens next. I'm meeting individually with each of you this week. I need complete transparency. Those who cooperate will be part of rebuilding Meridian's reputation. Those who don't. She let the implication hang in the air. As she closed her tablet, Lynn noticed something she hadn't expected, respect in some of their eyes. Not all, but some. One last thing, she said. The accounting team has been working in that basement office with broken air conditioning for 2 years. Get it fixed today. She looked directly at Ms. Zhao from HR. And approved the raise requests that have been sitting on your desk since January. Lynn gathered her materials. Meeting adjourned. Ms. Zhao, Mr. Chen, and Mr. Torres, you'll be first for our one-on-one conversations. My assistant will schedule you. As they filed out, Lynn caught snippets of whispered conversations. Words like serious and trouble floated back to her. Good, she thought. They should be worried. Things were about to change around here. 6 weeks flew by in a blur of meetings, revelations, and difficult decisions. Lynn's office had transformed from its pristine corporate emptiness into a working command center. Charts covered the walls. Sticky notes framed her computer. The Peace Lily had been joined by 2 more plants, gifts from staff members who'd found their voice under her leadership. The morning sun streamed through the windows as Lynn reviewed the latest financial reports. The numbers were improving, slowly but surely. Trust was harder to rebuild than balance sheets, but they were making progress. A knock at her open door made her look up. It was Raj, now promoted to senior financial analyst. The team finished the audit on the Thompson account, he said, placing a folder on her desk. Clean as a whistle. And the new transparency protocols caught 2 reporting errors before they went out. Lynn smiled. That's exactly what we needed to hear. After Raj left, Lynn leaned back in her chair, remembering her early days in the new role. The one-on-one meetings had been eye-opening. 3 executives had resigned rather than face scrutiny. 2 others had broken down crying, admitting they'd suspected problems but had been too afraid to speak up. Only one had been directly involved in the fraud, Mr. Torres, who now faced criminal charges alongside Mr. Patel. The rest were simply people who'd chosen the easier path, looking away, staying quiet, protecting their careers instead of doing what was right. Lynn hadn't fired them all, though many expected her to. Instead, she'd made them part of the solution. You know where the weaknesses are, she told them. Help me fix them. A text message pulled her from her thoughts. It was from Victoria Chan. Monthly numbers looking good. Board meeting tomorrow. Be ready to present your vision. Lynn took a deep breath. Tomorrow would be her first board presentation, her chance to show Atlas Corp that their faith in her wasn't misplaced. Her desk phone buzzed. Ms. Wu, your 11 o'clock is here, her assistant said. Send them in, please. The door opened to reveal a small group of people Lynn had been looking forward to meeting. The new hires for the Ethics Committee, a group that hadn't existed at Meridian until Lynn created it. Welcome, she said, standing to greet them. Please, sit down. They were an intentionally diverse group, a risk analyst with 20 years of experience, a fresh-faced compliance officer from a competing firm, an IT security specialist, and a middle-aged woman who'd worked in Meridian's customer service department for a decade. I've chosen each of you for a reason, Lynn explained once they were settled. You have different backgrounds, different perspectives, but one thing in common, you've all spoken up when something wasn't right, even when it was difficult. The customer service representative, Penny, raised her hand hesitantly. I'm still not sure why I'm here. I'm not an executive or an analyst. Lynn nodded. You're here because 3 years ago, you filed 6 separate reports about customer complaints that weren't being addressed properly. Reports that were ignored by management. She smiled at Penny's surprised expression. Nothing that happens in this company is too small to matter. For the next hour, Lynn outlined her vision for the Ethics Committee, a truly independent body with real power to investigate concerns from any employee, regardless of their position. The old Meridian protected itself, she told them. The new Meridian protects its people and its customers. After the meeting, Lynn walked through the accounting department, her old home. The air conditioning was working now. The worn carpet had been replaced. People looked up and smiled as she passed, no longer afraid to be noticed. At her old cubicle, now occupied by a new hire, Lynn paused. The desk was tidy, the computer humming, a family photo displayed proudly. Nothing remained of her time there. Yet everything had started in this small space, her questions, her persistence, her refusal to look away. Everything okay, Ms. Wu? The new employee asked, looking nervous. Lynn smiled. Everything's fine, just remembering where I started. As she walked back to the elevator, Lynn's phone buzzed with another message from Victoria. Board impressed by quarterly results. Expansion plans approved. Well done. Lynn tucked her phone away, a quiet pride warming her chest. The journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. 1 year to the day after security had escorted her from the building, Lynn stood at the podium in Atlas Corp's main auditorium. The annual shareholders' meeting was bigger than she'd expected. Hundreds of faces looked back at her, waiting for her to speak. In the front row sat Victoria Chang, elegant as always in her simple black suit, jade pendant gleaming against her collar. She gave Lynn an almost imperceptible nod. 1 year ago, Lynn began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I was an analyst who found something wrong in the numbers. Today, I'm here to tell you about how Meridian Financial has changed since then. The large screen behind her displayed simple graphs showing Meridian's recovery, profits up, client trust restored, employee satisfaction improved. But numbers only told part of the story. When I took over as executive director, Meridian had lost more than money. It had lost its way. Lynn paused, looking out at the sea of faces. We've spent this year rebuilding, not just our financial position, but our culture. She clicked to the next slide. Photos of the new ethics training program, the mentorship initiative, the community investment projects. The practical results of her vision. Every employee now has a secure channel to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Every financial report is reviewed by at least 3 separate teams. Every client complaint receives a personal response within 24 hours. From the corner of her eye, Lynn caught movement at the back of the auditorium. A side door had opened, and 2 men in suits were escorting someone in. With a jolt, she recognized Mr. Patel, her former boss, now awaiting trial. Their eyes met across the crowded room. He looked away first. Lynn pressed on, not letting his presence distract her. The old way of doing business, looking the other way, covering up problems, silencing those who speak up, nearly destroyed this company. The new way has made us stronger than ever. She clicked to her final slide. A simple quote from her grandmother that had guided her through the toughest days. The truth costs something. Lies cost everything. Thank you for your trust this past year, Lynn concluded. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together. The applause was immediate and genuine. As Lynn stepped away from the podium, Victoria Chang took her place. Thank you, Lynn, Victoria said into the microphone. Your work at Meridian has exceeded our highest expectations. She turned to address the shareholders directly, which is why the board has unanimously voted to promote Lynn Wu to Chief Operating Officer of Atlas Corp, overseeing all 17 of our companies. Lynn froze halfway to her seat. This wasn't part of the plan. Nobody had told her about any promotion. Victoria smiled at her shocked expression. Sometimes the best surprises are the ones we don't see coming. Isn't that right, Lynn? More applause filled the room as Lynn returned to the podium, still processing what had just happened. As Chief Operating Officer, she would have the power to implement the same changes across all of Atlas Corp's businesses. the impact would be enormous. "Thank you," she said simply. "I won't let you down." Later, at the reception, Lynn found a quiet moment with Victoria. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. Victoria sipped her sparkling water. "Because I wanted to see your genuine reaction. Besides, you earned this on your own merit. No one can ever say it was handed to you." Across the room, Lynn spotted Mr. Patel being led back out, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Their eyes met one final time. Lynn didn't feel the anger she expected. Instead, she felt something close to gratitude. If he hadn't thrown her out that day, she would never have found her true path. As if reading her thoughts, Victoria said quietly, "Sometimes being pushed down is exactly what we need to rise higher." On the drive home, Lynn called her grandmother. The old woman listened patiently to the whole story. "Are you happy?" she asked finally. Lynn looked out at the city lights, thinking about everything that had changed in a year. Her career, her confidence, her understanding of what really mattered. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And she was. Not because of revenge or vindication, but because she had stayed true to herself when it mattered most. In the end, that had made all the difference.